wa barakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Yesterday, we touched on this point that the jurists, when we're looking at that in particular, that they were very careful about sorting out their evidence. So what you've just finished doing, that exercise of the sick cow, is meant to give every participant a personal sense of trying to sort out solutions to problems, which is pretty much what scholars try to do, what the early generations of Muslims tried to do, to continuously sort out problems, but to make sure their solutions had a basis. That, as we said, it wasn't just pure common sense, it wasn't just being rational, but that it was guided rationality. So that's another way we describe ijtihad, that it's guided rationality. It's the use of your reason, but making sure that you are guided first and foremost, that your stable base is in the revelation itself. So we want to then look at the primary and secondary sources of evidence and how this works, how this plays out. Now, for those who are already familiar with this subject area, this diagram is easy. So what we'll do quickly is look at, on one side we have the Quran and Sunnah. These are regarded as the primary sources of evidence for every scholar. Primary because everything has to align with this. Now everything we see on this side of the diagram, all of these have connections, they are flowing from here. And I know this was touched on yesterday, that every other source of evidence, every other tool, every other rational tool that the jurists use, that scholars use, all of them are linked here, not by accident, but deliberately. And as we move forward, we'll try and emphasize that as we go forward. So on this side, we have the Quran and Sunnah. On this side, we then have those tools which he just finished talking about. In principle, all the scholars, all the schools agree that these two form the primary sources of evidence, and that the Quran and Sunnah will always be the first basis, the reference point, the foundation for everything, the clarifier for everything. We use the word in principle because when it comes to something like Sunnah, for instance, they will differentiate, there was differentiation between single chain hadith and multiple chain hadith, and how much certainty can a single chain hadith give you compared to a multiple chain hadith. That's a conversation that we'll come to, inshallah, but the first, I think, and the most important point to note here is all scholars agree that these two are the foundational sources of evidence. When it then comes to the other tools, and we're about Iqra, I miss you, yes, and we're about to go step by step through Iqra, I miss you, that is where you will find differences of opinion. Again, in principle, where you would find that a particular scholar, a particular mujtahid, will say, for instance, that yes, I use ijma, I use consensus opinion as the basis for some of my decisions, and another scholar would say, yes, I also do the same. However, consensus of whose opinion, you would see a difference of opinion between the scholars. Inshallah, let's not waste time doing the overview. Let's go slowly. I believe this has just been touched on. Yeah? Not really. Looks similar to the last one to me. Another quoting. There's yet another quoting.
Here sometimes just read whatever and they will say that is Quran and Sunnah. And then this one and that is.
Aha. Okay, what is this one? Just say Quran and Sunnah. Okay, so let's do this way. If we go back to the sick cow exercise, and we think of the opinion, I would rather go one by one than come back here. Because you already need to know this for you to be able to answer this. So hold on, there's a slide I'm looking for that should help. Not this one. Okay. So primary sources, Quran, the word of Allah, Hadith, Sunnah. We know what Hadith are, so we won't spend too much time on this, but we would still emphasize this is what scholars agree upon. Quran, the word of Allah, Hadith / Sunnah. What we are looking at is the Sunnah. The Hadith give us, they are you would say the container from which you can fetch the Sunnah. But sometimes we'll use Hadith / Sunnah to help us understand what are we talking about. But what you are basically looking at is the Sunnah itself. That is the practice or the words of the Prophet, peace be upon him, that now form the basis for a decision or a judgment. So you might read a particular Hadith. So we are done with this slide for now, because we are still doing first quoting. So this is understood. This is the primary basis. Now, once an issue cannot get grounding from the text of the Quran or the Sunnah, or the Quran or the Hadith actually mention the issue, but you then find that there is what we called yesterday ambiguity. The meaning is not clear. It means the scholar has to then make a shift. So anytime you hear differences of opinion among scholars, it usually means that the issue, they cannot find something clear, categorical, in the Quran or Sunnah. Usually that's the meaning. That once you have your classical scholars or your scholars from a clear school, once you hear difference of opinion, what that usually means is typically there was nothing categorical, nothing certain in the Quran or Sunnah. Then they now start what we call ijtihad. That's where ijtihad kicks off. Now for ijtihad, we said yesterday, he said it again, there are certain sources that are relied upon. And we have used this acronym to try and capture the Arabic meaning or the Arabic names of all of the sources. So let's go to, they are the secondary sources. So let's go to, we'll start with the English, then we'll come to the Arabic. English consensus. Consensus, another word for consensus would be agreement. Yeah? Of scholars. This is opinion shared by scholars. Now, when we dig into, so what does that mean technically? We then see that even the scholars themselves are not in agreement about whose consensus or whose agreement are they going with. So some would say it's the consensus of scholars of a particular generation, not scholars across generations. So if you look at our time, as a generation, our time, and someone says, let's go with the opinion of the scholars or the consensus, then we'll be considering what do contemporary scholars of this time or this age, what do they think about an issue? Did they all agree on an issue? If they have that agreement, then we'll be talking of consensus or ijma. Some others say consensus of scholars means the consensus of scholars from a particular place. So they are looking at it from this concept or perspective of context, that if scholars within a space or a place can have the same opinion or view on a particular matter, then that matter should be given weight. Then you, an individual, can go with that opinion and say the scholars of this community have discussed this issue and they have agreed on this. Or even if they didn't discuss, but when you ask them, you keep getting the same response. Yet others say that in essence, in actual fact, it's very difficult to get all scholars to agree on one thing. So usually when you hear that scholars agree on something, they say it very often means there's something in the Quran already backing it up. So if you think of this concept of what this consensus means, ijma, it has many different sides to it. It's not a unified thing. You can't just say ijma of scholars without being able to break down ijma of which scholars. And what do you mean by that ijma? So even in that debate itself, you see evidence that if we had in the Quran or Sunnah a definition of ijma, then nobody would be debating about this. Again, underscoring the point that once you hear differences of opinion, it means that matter, Allah did not close the discussion on that matter. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't close the discussion. That's why there's still room for us to discuss. So that's the Arabic ijma. For those who are still trying to remember and attach it, if you think, what's jama'ah? The gathering, the congregation, the group. You think Jumu'ah, gathering, congregation, group. So if you are trying to remember the Arabic term, just think it's consensus opinion of the group, jam'i, ijma'. Analogy, comparing a new issue to an old one which has a ruling from Quran and Sunnah and which has the same rationale. So for that one, let me use the diagram here. If I ask you that between a green apple, oh sorry, wrong drawing, and a pear, and a red apple, that between the pear and the red apple, which one is more like a green apple? So some people say red, some say pear. For those who say pear, why? Color. For those who say red apple, why? Name, apple, shape, content, taste, etc., etc., etc. So if someone tells you that pear costs, how much do these things cost these days? Let's say 800 naira. A red apple costs 1,000 naira, but you're not sure what a green apple would cost. Your guess would be it's most likely going to cost how much? A green apple? For those who say it's more like a red apple, are going to go with 1,000 naira. Typically, right? We are going somewhere with this apple and pear talk. Now, this particular tool analogy is saying, remember where we are coming from. There's an issue on ground. Remember that our flow diagram, there's a specific question, and the scholar or scholars have looked in Quran and Sunnah, and they have encountered that situation we call silence, or, can we remember the other word? Ambiguity in the text. Meaning they can't find this issue addressed specifically in the Quran or Sunnah, or it's addressed but the meaning implication isn't clear. So they have now started ijtihad. So now they look at the new issue. I'm starting a new diagram here. So this is their new issue with a question mark on it. And they say, what conclusion should we draw? What should the answer be? How should this issue be solved? When they want to use this tool, they say, well, let's go back to the Quran and Sunnah. Is there an existing ruling on an issue that is similar? This Nigerian style, answering a question with a question. Someone asks a question, and then the scholar says, in Quran and Sunnah, is there an existing ruling on an issue that is similar to this one? The similarity is important. It has to be similar to this issue in very specific ways. What's the specific way? Let me throw in some jargon here. If it's confusing, ignore it first until I speak English. They will be looking at the illah or the hikmah of the existing ruling. They will be saying that ruling in the Quran on the similar issue. The reason why that ruling is there, do we find that factor existing in this new issue? So let me give an example. In the Quran, the ruling regarding khamr, intoxicants, is clear. Any debate? No, it's very clear. It's what? Haram. If it intoxicates, we don't take it. Then you have issues like marijuana, or even there's this leaf they say in Mina, that if they pluck it, they soak it, they drink it. When the person starts displaying, you think the person even has aljanu. Yeah, real case. A teacher encountered that. He was told to come and do ruqyah that the boy has aljanu. The boy was displaying, a 10-year-old boy that 2 or 3 grown men could hardly hold down. Eventually, it was revealed that that leaf had been soaked for nearly 2 or 3 days. He drank it, and he was on another level for about 2 or 3 days as well. So somebody might say, well, we don't know what the ruling would be on such a leaf. Should they keep drinking it? Okay, many people are instantly saying no, no, no. So if we look at how scholars address issues to do with cocaine, marijuana, and co, they use this analogy, that this thing intoxicates. Don't mind what you call it. Whether you call it drink, or whether you drink it or you smoke it, or you shoot it up, it's going to do the same thing to your brain that khamr does to the brain. So haram. In that case, they are looking at the new issue. The new issue is what? The new leaf, right? Existing ruling, issue with existing ruling is khamr, haram. Does the rationale for prohibiting khamr exist in the case of the leaf? Yes. What's the illa? Yes, what it does to the apple. It exists, so extends the ruling there. That's reasoning by analogy. So they will speak of illa if it's in the Quran, they will speak of hikmah if it's something in the hadith, or hikmah, they are saying what's the wisdom behind it. Inshallah, when you get the chance to go through this course even more slowly, we'll come back to even these rulings, and you'll start hearing how one scholar in another school, or this scholar, criticizes this particular thing. For instance, there's criticism of analogy on the basis of if Allah doesn't tell you exactly why, in all cases, can you actually say, we understand this is the illah and we are going to extend it? That in some cases, you may extend an illah that's not really the illah, you don't know that it is. You are supposing. But this is why we said, once you enter this field, just know that there will be difference of opinion on everything. Some differences are even on the name. But let's not go there for now. Those who know it, know it. Those who are new, let's be going jeje. So the Arabic is qiyas. Usually some participants will say they want to see the Arabic. So if you see there's a slide already with the Arabic and it's in your material. So some people are more comfortable once they can see the Arabic, you'll find it there. Third, companion's opinion. Let me ask the question, why would the opinion of a companion bear so much weight that scholars would say if you don't find something in the Quran or Sunnah on an issue, you can actually go with the opinion of a companion? Because they knew the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They learned directly from the Prophet, they lived with the message. They what? They were the closest to him.
And the Prophet himself described them as people who can be emulated.
And he described them as people who can be emulated. So there are so many reasons that we are aware of that would lead people, scholars, to say if the companion says something, in the absence of anything to the contrary in Quran or Sunnah, then we will use that as the basis for reaching a decision or forming an opinion or making a ruling. The caveat usually put there is as long as that opinion is not opposed by another companion's opinion. In which case you might move in the other direction. But they usually say once you see an opinion given by a companion and there's no known contradiction, then that gives you greater certainty. Because what the scholars or mujtahid are doing with these, they are trying to maximize certainty. Come as close as possible to what is likely to have been the Prophet's stance, or the stance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we could ask. In the time of revelation, if people weren't sure of something, Then they just went to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and they would ask him. And in some cases, some would want him to ask Allah. So in those days, in a sense, you could ask Allah a question and wait for an answer. Gosh, the question me I would have asked them. So Arabic, Ra'ya Sahabi. Sometimes you might see it as Ra'ya Sahaba. Okay, so those with Arabic are using the tajweed. Fire on. All right, praxis of Medina. Sorry, I should explain what? Okay. Praxis of Medina, or praxis of the people of Medina. That should be complete. The praxis of the people of Medina. Sometimes we see it translated as the practice of the people of Medina. So let's use English here to help us understand the essence of this. Practice simply means something people do, usually. Praxis means it's a practice that is rooted oh gosh, the word just flew out of my head. It's rooted in understanding, in a philosophy, in a belief, in values. Why I'm making this distinction in English is there's a reason why it's translated into praxis, classically, not practice. Because this is where the weight is given to the religious practices, the beliefs, the actions of a particular generation of the people of Medina. And Brother Nuru touched on this yesterday. It's not the Medina of today. It's not the people of the Medina of today. It's not even the people of Medina of last century. It's the people of Medina in the early generations. So that Amal Ahlul Medina is referring to the practice of the Tabi'in and the Tabi'in, which has its own roots in the practices of the Sahaba, who have their roots in where? Which is using the name of the tools, Quran and Sunnah. So the person who loved this one, who used it very well, is who? Imam Malik. He was a student of the Tabi'in. He lived in Medina. He was born there. Today we say born, bred, and buttered. Of the four of them, he was the person that you say this was Medina. He was in that town. And his learning was from his teachers directly, but also from his observation, his knowledge of what obtained in Medina. Yesterday, Brother Nuru used an example to explain how Imam Malik would look at Amal Ahlul Medina, and for that reason put aside a hadith that has very few narrators. Do we remember the issue he used yesterday? Which is? 2 rams or 1, if it's a male or a female. And Imam Malik went with which one? 1, whether it's male or female. Because when he looked in Medina of his time, he said, I don't see this hadith being practiced. I don't see what is contained in this narration by Aisha being practiced among the people. So I don't understand how come that was said, under what context, what was he referring to. So it's strange, shaz. So I'm going to put that hadith aside. He didn't say the hadith is faulty or wrong, no. The hadith in terms of the normal checking is fine, but I don't understand why it's clashing now with what I see. So he took the praxis of the people of Medina as the sunnah in action, as the consensus of the people of Medina based on their knowledge of the sunnah. So Amal Ahlul Medina is sometimes seen as a form of ijma'. It's not narrated. It's also, from the point of view of Imam Malik, it's sunnah in action, so not narrated. So if you were to take 10, 15, 20 people across 2 generations, tens, thousands, and weigh theirs, you would say this is a multiple chain hadith, correct? So that was why he valued this very much. But that praxis being referred to must be general, Sharia-based, and among knowledgeable people, and I've touched on all of these. So in Arabic, it's Amal Amal Ahl al-Madina. The Amal of the Ahl of Medina. Number 5. Question, yes sir. Wa alaikum assalam. I'm so sorry.
Because item number 3 is still present on my head.
Okay.
Rai.
Yes, please.
Where does Rai stand in the face of all these things? And particularly, we tend to refer today when the scholar said Rai is my opinion.
Okay.
Does it carry any weight in the face of all these things?
That's the opinion of a scholar?
Yes.
Okay.
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 So where does Rai stand actually?
Today.
In modern context.
All right. Rai means opinion, linguistically speaking. Here, it's attached to the opinion of a companion. So when does Rai have weight and how much weight does it carry? I think part of what we discussed yesterday was this very point, that if a scholar holds an opinion, what is more important is, what is the scholar's opinion based upon? Because the scholar's opinion should be based upon something. It could be Quran, could be Sunnah, or it could be one of these. Now, the opinion of the companion carries its own weight because of some of the things mentioned earlier. Again, even when we go into Sirah or Hadith, you will see that it's not all companions whose opinion was given the same weight. There was gradation. There were those companions that if it's a matter of understanding a text of the Quran, even the senior companions know, talk to this person. And who is one such known person? Ibn Abbas. They knew that one, talk to him, and you will get at some of the core things. So even amongst them, they knew they had their own levels. So in as much as we even have Roya Sahabi here, it doesn't mean every single companion whose name is called, once they say it, then it has that much weight. The thing I think that's important for us to also remember is these let me call them ways of thinking, were given names much later. These were names given to practices of the companions themselves. So that when you look at the early jurists like Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, and they would be considering the opinion of a companion, it would be because they knew that the companions themselves used to consult one another. Our having the Quran now, today, in this single volume form, is because of the opinion of one companion that was agreed upon by the Caliph at the time and a second senior companion. Whose opinion pushed for it? Umar ibn al-Khattab. It was his opinion. It's not in the Quran that you should know that the Quran has now been revealed. There's no such verse. Now it has been revealed. Gather it all in a single volume. But Umar saw something, formed an opinion, took it to another companion. Who did he take it to? Actually, two of them were seated, Abu Bakr and Uthman, and said, I think we should do this because of this reason. And he gave his reason. And they argued it out. It was not straightforward, like, oh, you have an opinion, great, let's do it. No, they talked. I think it was Abu Bakr narrating it, said Umar kept talking and talking until they saw the reason, the sense, the rationale. So even when we say opinion of a companion, the jurist will still look at that opinion. What is it based on? What is this opinion supposed to try to achieve before accepting? So if a scholar today says, this is my opinion, the scholar's opinion, if the scholar is worth his or her salt, will be based on something. And what the little I've seen so far, the very good scholars don't just say, it's my opinion, take it. They explain, they build it up, then they say, this is where my opinion is coming from. And that allows us to see where they are coming from. And then you decide, I see, I understand, I agree, or I see and I don't agree, or I still don't see. I don't know if that helps, sir.
Yeah, but in the context
of today's one, it's to understand where's that opinion coming from. Yes, does it have enough to give it weight for us to follow? But it can't just be I have an opinion and the person expects us to follow it because theirs is also Rai. Everybody can have an opinion in that sense.
But even the scholars themselves, they tell you right.
Yes. And they mean it linguistically. I think when some scholars say they are trying to say this is my view based on my understanding and my knowledge, I also feel it's scholars' way of trying to make it clear that I'm not saying Allah said. Somebody else may disagree with me, it's fine, but Ra'inani, this is mine. Okay, so number 5, legal presumption. This was touched on yesterday, and if you remember that flow diagram, this is said to be the first point. Because every matter has where it belongs in the sight of Allah. Every matter has its default position, its ranking in Allah's sight, generally speaking. So to every issue, there's a general rule. If someone poses a question to us saying I'm trying to find the question. There's one that might come up tomorrow. Can you eat kangaroo? I don't know if it was raised yesterday. Yes, can you eat kangaroo? You can start with yes and then argue for yes, or no, argue for no, or maybe and argue for maybe, but in reality there's a default position. It helps in dealing with issues to know what is the default position in Allah's sight. And we will use the term when all things are equal. So you remember yesterday also we talked about the categorizations of things, the ahkam, the 5. Something would either be fard, or it might be mustahab, or it might be mubah, and so on. Every matter has where it belongs. So when we talk about 5, legal presumption, what this particular rule is saying is, it's good to identify that starting position and you go with the starting position unless you have evidence to make you shift your position. There's a whole slide that breaks it down. I'll come to that slide later. Number 6, public interest, considering people's welfare. This is one of those tools of usul that, unlike many of the others, it's not telling you a specific answer. Rather, it's saying what should be considered, then you get an answer. So that consideration is here, people's welfare. What is the consideration for the welfare of people at that certain point in time? And the Arabic is maslaha. I know maslaha came up yesterday, came up sometime today as well. Oh, I forgot. Legal presumption is istishab. This is, that's sinun, then the second one is swadun. Istishab. It has another one similar to it. So for those seeing it for the first time, is to try to remember that this one shares a similar root to the word sahaba. Istishab. Presumption. Then we've covered maslaha. 7th, juristic discretion or wisdom. This is the one that Brother Nuru mentioned earlier, that at some point you still have to choose. At some point the scholar has to still say, of all the available sources, secondary sources, this is the source I will go with, and of all the possible outcomes or results, this is where I stand. That choice still has to be made. If we think of you in terms of professionals, working within your professional setting or space, whether you consult, whether you talk to an expert, whether you go and find out more, you still have to choose a course of action. If we go back to the sick cow, after all the different ideas have been put on the table, you still have to decide on a course of action. So juristic discretion or wisdom is choosing the best of several alternative tools. It's usually said this is the one that allows jurists to move from school to school, which is permissible. There's the Arabic term for it. Is it Tawfiq? Yes. Where someone who is in the Maliki school is faced with an issue, trying to do ijtihad and find what's the best solution, and then because of that person's knowledge of one of the other school's methodology, or a ruling or conclusion they've already drawn, then says, based on this context, that conclusion, that methodology is best. So the scholar from the Maliki school leaves the Maliki position on that issue and borrows from Hanafi position. And yesterday, when we were talking about the benefit of diversity among the schools early on in the day, he made reference to this. How each school seems to have where it's strongest, what it's best at. Is it Islamic finance? Then this school is stronger. Is it Hajj and so on? This school seems to have stronger opinions, much more workable ones. So when it comes to istihsan, when you see a scholar doing that, the scholar is actually going by way of istihsan. And at this point, we are giving these names and demarcating clearly so we can discuss and talk about it. When it's operationalized, the classical scholars didn't say this. You won't see them often saying, I am about to do istihsan, away to istihsan, and then they start talking. No, they just, you just follow, you just follow the rationale. When I was studying up for this particular section, so that I could break it down for students, I felt, let me look for juristic opinions, actual rulings, where the scholar is saying this is the ruling and why, so that I can explain it. That was when I saw this crystal clear. That the scholar will just explain, blah, 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 and then conclude, and it's you, the person who knows the tools, that can start decoding, okay, here, this is what is happening here, this is what is happening here. In some cases, you can't even decode easily. So I had to ask Perplexity and ChatGPT to bayan more so I can decode better. All right, juristic discretion or wisdom, Arabic term, istihsan. Think ihsan, ihsan means what? Excellence, goodness, best, but is it intensive or superlative form? So when you consider what is the best or most excellent choice of all the alternative tools, then think ihsan, then think istihsan, the selection of the best.